Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Rabbi Yaffe, and we are here at Congregation L'Dor Vador in Little Neck, New York. And on my screen to my left is Marc Tobin, who is the son of Janet and Erwin Tobin, longtime members of our congregation. Grew up in New York and made Aliyah. In 1998. At that point, he was in Boca Raton, Florida, but originally Marc was from Great Neck. Marc has a law degree and has worked in various high-tech, biotech, and low-tech ventures in Israel for the past 23 years. Currently works in the wealth management field. He studied political science and Judaic studies at Brandeis University. And Marc and his wife, Dodi, live in Beit Shemesh. And Marc and Dodi have 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. 2 boys who are married. Their daughter is engaged to be married. Oldest son has served in the Givati unit, second son in the paratroopers, and third son in Nachal, still active, but studying in yeshiva now. Future son-in-law is intelligent unit for Kfir. We have invited Marc to speak to us and with us. Marc has been our link to the Israeli on the ground, often from this side of the ocean. It's very hard to get a real sense of what it's like to be living in Israel in good times and in tough times. And so from time to time, we've asked Marc to come and share with us some insider's views. It was about a week ago that Marc contacted me and said, I think it's time for me to come again. And I said, absolutely. And with what's going on in Israel today, I would like to begin by asking Marc some questions, but let me just say to everyone that if you have a question, if Marc says something that makes you think about something and you'd like to write it down, please send it in the chat. And a little later on, we'll have the opportunity to try and entertain questions and comments from the community here. So we hope that you will do that. And the format today is I have a few questions. I will tell everybody that I think since Monday, I think 5-6 hours a day, I've been talking nonstop about what's going on. I think that this is a very, very important reality and a harsh reality for the Jewish people, wherever we may be. And I'm just delighted that we are able to connect with Marc, who is in Israel, and his parents, Janet and Erwin, who are in Israel. And so the first thing that I'd like to talk is really on a personal level, or question. I'd like to know how it has been to endure this yet once again. There was a similar type of attack in 2014. 2,000 rockets within a week, and all of the tensions. Well, I'd like to get a little bit of a feeling of what is a day like? What is a night like? What is it? What is the experience of living in Israel? Yesterday, we heard that it was magnificent weather, and we heard that your parents went shopping for food not too long ago. But I'd like to hear from you. What's the feeling? What's the experience of being in Israel during this difficult time? Marc?
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone in America. Good afternoon, everybody in Israel, and Chag Sameach as we approach Shavuot this evening. I think it's a very difficult thing to explain what it's like in Israel at this point during a war. It's very surreal that we sit out on our deck and we watch the fireworks on a daily and nightly basis. On Wednesday, I was supposed to have a full day of meetings in Tel Aviv and in Netanya that I had to cancel because the government said that we should remain close to home so that you can go into your safe room. For me personally, this is I think my fourth experience. We had experiences sending our 4-year-old and 5-year-old to their preschool and their kindergarten with gas masks earlier in our tenure in Aliyah. 2014, we ran in and out of the safe room. And again, we're at that point. I'm actually speaking to you right now from our safe room that has the window to the outside world open for the first time since Monday night, because we had it closed. It's a cinder block window that we're supposed to keep closed in the event of an attack. We personally here in Beit Shemesh have only had one siren, which was the first rockets that came on Monday night. So for Dodi and myself, it hasn't been so bad. We slept in the mamad in the safe room one night, but my parents and my brother and my 2 older sons have been in and out of the safe room the entire week. My very close friends in Ashkelon have been pounded time and time again. In fact, just 15 minutes ago, there was another pounding of Ashkelon and Ashdod. We are a very resilient people in Israel. The people of Israel are very resilient. We know the entire world sometimes looks down upon us and is not supportive of us. Not present company, of course, and the American community, are the exception. But we're very strong, and we try to go on our life as best as possible. We had a great Shabbat. It was nice not having the news, but like you, being obsessed with a couple of hours a day, we're pretty obsessed with what's going on here, constantly checking the news, constantly checking in with family, knowing what's going on. Our neighbor, who is my daughter's closest friend in the world, 20 years old, is in the Air Force, and she's in the Kiryat, the Israeli Pentagon, part of the Air Force, working 12-hour shifts. So it's very real for us. Each person that gets injured in Israel, each person that gets killed in Israel is a significant blow to the morale of the country. We value the country as a whole, and the leadership values human life beyond comprehension. So on the one hand, we all sit in our safe rooms or in our houses watching the news and say, we should be carpeting bombing, and Gaza should be rubble with nothing left standing. We all understand that human life is very important, and so the loss of life in Israel when these things happen is very moving for everyone here. A 5-year-old boy was killed going in the safe room. An 85-year-old Holocaust survivor was killed. A woman and her Indian aide were killed because they couldn't make it into the safe room. We're very fortunate that we have a relatively new house and we have a safe room in our house. But my future son-in-law's brother lives in an apartment in Tel Aviv on the 10th floor with a newborn baby. So they have to go up and down the stairs every time a siren rings. It was tough telling my parents, who are 85 and 84 years old, that it would be better off for them to sleep in the safe room than in their bedroom. So that's what it's like to be in Israel right now. We're very optimistic. We're very proud of our army in every way, in both their abilities to combat these terrorists, but also in the humanity that the Israeli army shows. So I think that's how I think what we feel right now going into the Chag. Zman Matan Toratenu. We're supposed to go in with simcha, and there's a little bit of apprehension for all of us to be 25 hours without the news. But we know that if the siren rings, we know where we have to go. So, we're very optimistic that we're going to come out of this as a stronger people than as a weaker people.
Thank you, Mark. You mentioned that so much of the world has a negative opinion of Israel. And recently, we've all been excited and strengthened by the Abraham Accords and the Arab countries of Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and Sudan, etc., creating normalization and diplomatic relations, and very exciting. So at the top of the New York Times yesterday on page 10, it says, Arab world condemns Israeli violence, but refrains from taking action. And in the article, it says that when it was, that if it was just Gaza, there wouldn't be too much reaction. But what brought them to be angry and what brought them to be knocking on the door of the UN and trying to get the world to come down on Israel, according to the article, is what happened in Jerusalem and the storming of the Aqsa Mosque and the attempt of eviction of people from Sheikh Jarrah, and that Jerusalem is a sacred place, and that is what is angering the Arab world. I'd like you to share with us, and not only that, it's also angering some of the those who are on the left end of the spectrum in our country. There's a lot of talk about what happened in Jerusalem and what gave rise and what was what was the response, and even those who will say doesn't forgive the wanton terrorist attacks of Hamas. Even those people who will say that, they will be very quick to condemn what happened in Jerusalem, and indeed what's happening all over the world, all over the country, that has been given rise to the unrest in the Israeli Arab population. Mark?
Okay, so a couple of things. One is, I would say you have to look at the New York Times, today as a very different paper for the paper that I grew up with. It used to be the paper of record. Today it's the paper of a narrative that they want to follow. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, this week the UAE, after they did indicate that they were unhappy with with what was going on in Jerusalem, they also indicated that they were canceling a $10 billion infrastructure project in Gaza because of the actions of Hamas. So that's a pretty big thing. And the UAE is our partner. And unlike the Jordanians, the UAE is truly a partner of Israel. There's a lot of things going on there. Bahrain has been relatively quiet. We haven't heard anything. I think when you talk about the UN is a very political place where it's very biased against Israel. It always has been. Developing countries have always been against Israel. It's part of their modus operandi, and that's how they're playing to a lot of domestic constituencies. And in the Arab world, as long as everybody focuses on the negative things in Israel, they don't focus on the negativity of their own governments. So I think that we take all that with a grain of salt. I know that the UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, for that matter, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, they're not going to war with Israel over Hamas. Yes, they use Jerusalem as a rallying cry, and that's been going on for centuries. That's been going on. In 1929, the Arab riots in Hebron, which killed many, many people in the old Yishuv, were sparked by rumors in August of 1929 that the Jews were going to take over the Temple Mount. Those rumors came about because Jews wanted to blow the shofar during the month of Elul at the Kotel, and they were forbidden by the British. And that sparked the riots in Hebron. We know that that's the way Hamas operates. Hamas creates sparks and creates situations where they can explode, and then uses those to justify firing rockets. In this particular situation, the last month was the month of Ramadan, which is it's a best way for me to describe it. It's like a full month of Yom Kippur for us, where Muslims fast all day long from dawn until until sunset. It's a time of heightened spirituality for most Muslims. In most Muslim countries, it's a celebratory time. Every night they have celebratory dinners, and it ends with a celebration, Eid al-Fitr, which is like the culmination of their holy month. Unfortunately, in Israel, specifically in Jerusalem, the way it works, and especially this year, was where we were dealing with Corona, coming out of Corona. And just so everybody knows, the rate of Arab Israelis and Palestinians getting vaccinated compared to Jewish Israelis is much lower. Not because Israel is withholding anything from Arab Israelis, because they go to the same health clinics that I do. They get the same exact service that I do, and my family gets, and all Jews get. It's because they chose not to get vaccinated. The Palestinians decided to use their money rather than buying vaccinations. They used it for bomb making or missiles or various things, Hamas. The PA chose to try to blame Israel and call it an apartheid state, but not giving it its own medicine when they have their own health services. And they chose not to buy the vaccines from Pfizer. They chose to buy the vaccines from Russia, which was a much later development. So because of Corona this year, there were some restrictions placed, like every other person in the world, on public gatherings. And so Ramadan usually is a time at night when the feasts start, where in Jerusalem, young Arabs usually gather outside the Damascus gate. But this year, because of Corona and the desire to not get people infected, Israel put up some barriers, just like they put up barriers at the Kotel during Corona, so that people wouldn't congregate. Well, the Arabs viewed that as a provocation. There was also something going on in Jerusalem starting in the middle of April, which was called the TikTok. It was a TikTok video campaign by young Arab men who would go on buses and the light rail and punch in the face, usually unsuspecting, mostly Haredi men, and record them and put it up on TikTok to get likes. All this came together at the same time. Ramadan, closing off or restricting access to the Damascus Gate, that all came together at the same time. There were riots at the Damascus Gate for a couple of nights. There were beating up of Jews coming out of the Damascus Gate from the Kotel. And there were some nationalist, I would say far right-wing Jews who decided they had to stick up for the Jews that were being beaten up. That's kind of like a background of what happened. The Sheikh Jarrah situation is a land dispute. It's a simple contractual land dispute that's been in the courts for 40 years. And it revolves around a legal battle over property that was owned by Jews prior to 1948, that when Jordan took control over East Jerusalem after the war in 1948 and occupied East Jerusalem, certain Arabs came into those houses. Certain Arabs, the Jordanians, wrote down their rights to those houses, and that's not in dispute now. Certain did not write down, the Jordanians did not write down their access to those houses, and those are in dispute right now. There are four, as far as I understand, there are 4 cases before the Supreme Court, four claims. But it's a real estate issue. It has nothing to do with a nationalistic issue. It has nothing to do with evictions. The state is not evicting them. It's private property held by private individuals, or actually in this case, a company that is seeking to get people either to pay rent on the property, which they rejected at the court level, or to evict them because they're squatting in the land, in the houses. So it has nothing to do with nationalism. It has nothing to do with the country displacing people. Unfortunately, a number of lawmakers in America who should really know better than to just jump on unreported facts that they don't know about, have decided that they are going to promote this narrative that Israel is evicting Palestinians and Judaizing Arab neighborhoods in Jerusalem. So first of all, Jerusalem doesn't have Arab neighborhoods or Jewish neighborhoods. Jerusalem is the united capital of Israel. So yes, there are neighborhoods where there are a majority of Arabs. There are neighborhoods where there are a majority of Jews. There are neighborhoods where there are only Jews, and there are neighborhoods where there are only Arabs. But everybody's free to live there if they can buy the property, or they rent the property. Now, the fact that the world is promoting something that says Jews can't live in this area is the exact opposite of the claim of apartheid. They claim Israel is an apartheid state. Well, you're telling us that Jews can't live with Arabs. That, by definition, would be you promoting apartheid. So I think that this was viewed as a, in broad strokes, this was viewed as everybody says, Hamas just needed a spark to light everything up. So they jumped on these things. But the real force behind what's going on right now is the inter-clan rivalry between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority run by Mahmoud Abbas. I'm sure most people know that there were supposed to be elections the first time since 2006 in the Palestinian Authority that Mahmoud Abbas canceled. By all indications, Hamas would have won the elections. They would have gained a majority. And Hamas really jumped on these opportunities to galvanize the Palestinian street to show that they were the party of the people. Here we are defending Jerusalem when the Palestinian Authority is ready to let it go. So this is really an inter-clan fight, and like most inter-clan fights that involve the country of Israel, Arab clan fights, everybody agrees that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So this is how the Hamas is able to get away with attacking Israel, because they can't attack the PA, and the PA can't attack Hamas. So they attack Israel, and that's how we get through it. I just want to add one thing, that Dodi and I, on Monday morning, on Yom Yerushalayim, on Jerusalem Day, which marks the anniversary of the reconquering of Jerusalem in 1967, we were at the Kotel for services, for Shacharit services on Monday morning. We were there at 7:30 in the morning, and the plaza was filled, and it was a beautiful morning, and we had a beautiful davening going on. And right about at the time that we got up to the Amidah prayer, all heck broke loose up on the Temple Mount. The stun grenades started, and this is where things get confusing for people who don't understand the situation, or just get their news from places like the New York Times. The New York Times headline was, I believe, police enter Temple Mount, riots and riots occur. Well, what happened was that they came out of the mosque and they decided to attack the police station, which is on the Temple Mount. And as a result of that, the stun grenades came. Also, I just want to point out that Ramadan, as I mentioned, is a holy month. And every night there are huge crowds that go onto the Temple Mount and listens to sermons by the imams in the Temple Mount, who are employed by the PA, Palestinian Authority. And just so that people in America can understand what this means, it means for 30 straight days, they listen to hate-filled speeches that go on for an hour and a half, after fasting for a full day, who get them all riled up with claims of the Jews want to take Alaska, the Jews want to kick us out of our lands, we need jihad. This is what goes on for 30 straight days up there. And it would be like in the equivalent of America of 30 straight nights of people listening to Reverend Farrakhan speak about the Jews, to kill the Jews. It's time to kill the Jews. They're taking everything from us. We need to destroy the Jews. They're the people of the devil. This is going on for 30 straight days. This is the context of what happened last Monday. Hamas picked up on that and decided they were the defenders of Jerusalem, defenders of Al-Aqsa. They issued an ultimatum at, I think it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, that said, if the Jews don't leave Alaska, by 6 o'clock, we're going to start with the rockets. And they started with the rockets. And that's where we are right now with Jerusalem. That's why they use Jerusalem as their rallying call, because they know that people will, it's a very emotional issue.
Thank you, Mark. The attempt of Hamas to supplant the Palestinian Authority and to become the ruling people of the Palestinian people is very scary. On Friday, I sent to the congregation a link to the Hamas charter, and or it was the highlights of the charter. And it's pretty clear that if you ever read, actually, it was you who suggested to me, all you need to do is read what Hamas is all about, and we'll know what's going on. So I knew about it, but I didn't see it in writing. So I read it and I sent it out. And it's pretty clear that, you know, Hamas, their raison d'etre is to get rid of Israel and the Jewish people, and that we don't have any right to be in any speck of the land. And that is just who Hamas is. And if that is the ruling power of the Palestinians, at least with Abbas or the Palestinian Authority, there was some cooperation with security, and there was an attempt, and we all like to think that some of the efforts of coexistence can be positive, but with Hamas seizing on this moment and potentially being successful, and the Arab Israeli population uprising like they are with this hatred, I'm extremely concerned about how this is going, a ceasefire, if there is, God willing, how this is going to end. Because if it seems as if the Palestinian Authority is weak and Hamas is strong, and you think that they would win the election, and God forbid, a democratic election that elects a terrorist party that is sworn to the elimination of Israel. That's what's happened with Gaza, with them being in Gaza. So I guess my question is, what to do, and what to do with the breaking down of the Palestinian Authority, and what to do with the uprising of the Arab Israelis, and what to do with Hamas. They might be temporarily stopped, but if they're still on the page, they are an eternal threat. And what can we do to live in peace in our own land?
Well, I think that we have to, first of all, understand the origins of Hamas. Hamas is an offshoot of the Islamic Brotherhood, which was formed in 1928 in Egypt. It was formed at a time where there was, I would say, we were moving, the Arab world was moving into secular nationalism. And this was a fundamental Muslim brotherhood who was rising against secular nationalism in the Arab world. When they started in 1928 in Egypt, they were obviously their first target was Egypt. It did spread into other countries eventually, but not at the same rate. I mean, as we all know from history, the Ottomans ruled what we now consider to be the Middle East. I think it's from the 1400s until World War I, when outside of Egypt had more sovereignty. But in World War I, the spoils for the British and the French were to divide up much of the territory in the modern Middle East. So Syria and Lebanon went French, and Transjordan was part of, and Iraq were part of the British Empire, and the Sauds, the House of Saud. And so up until that time, until 1928, there was it was plans that they kind of operated on their own. Hamas came about and started in 1988, right about the time of the first Intifada. And the first Intifada was a time where the Palestinians were uprising not only against Israel, but against the Palestinian. I would say the fact that they didn't feel that they were getting any representation from Arafat, who was outside of Israel, and he wasn't really helping them. So again, it was this internal clan situation where Hamas was able to step into a void of people who were feeling displaced. And I know you read the charter, but for just whatever, for the benefit of everybody on the call, on the Zoom, all I have to do is read the introduction to the charter to know for everyone to know who we're dealing with Hamas. And we talk about ceasefires and all things and potentially peace. Their charter states as follows. The introduction: Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it. That's it. We're not talking about coexistence. We're not talking about peace. We're not talking about anything. Okay, it's either us versus them. So everybody who gets caught up in the us versus them should know it is us versus them. It's a holy war. They talk about jihad. Jihad means holy war, displacing us, killing us, and that's what they're talking about. And not only that, they have the most anti-Semitic overtones of anyone. Their charter goes through the fact that, Israel is like the Nazis. Israel controls, the Jews control the banks, the Jews control media. It's really, I urge everyone to go online and read the Hamas charter. I wish a lot of people who are pro-Hamas and think that they're a civilian organization would go online and read the charter, and who we're dealing with. Also in Egypt, they don't like the Muslim Brotherhood too much. They have killed them over the years, many people. And in fact, when Mubarak, the uprising that brought Morsi to power, that was the Muslim Brotherhood. That was supported. That was the Muslim Brotherhood took over from Mubarak, and eventually Sisi and the generals beat back the Muslim Brotherhood. So that's what we're dealing. It's definitely a religious war for Hamas. It's a religious campaign, and it has nothing to do with civilians. It doesn't matter. That's why they have no problem shooting rockets. They're not fighting our army. They're shooting rockets at civilian targets. But we know that they are an enemy. The difference between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas for us is that they are an enemy. It's clear. We are fighting Hamas. We are just like they want to destroy us. They are our enemy. We have to inflict maximum damage on our enemy. And in fact, I believe it's patently immoral for Israel not to defend its citizens against a country that is genocidal against Israel.
We defend, Mark, but I know there's a lot of discussion about the wisdom of having pulled out of Gaza and therefore what has happened with Hamas taking over, but in a place like Gaza, which is right on our border, how is it possible that we continue, that it is allowed and possible for Hamas? Okay, so we stopped the rockets and we'll get a ceasefire, and it's only just like it was 7 years ago, and they're stronger and they have better rockets. They put all their money into defeating us. This cycle has to stop.
Well, I think first of all, you and I are both on the same side, obviously. The question that you should be asking that question is to representatives in the House and in the Senate, and thankfully at this point it's just a few. It's a small number. You should be asking that to the State Department in America. You should be asking that question to the UN. You should be asking that question to the EU. I don't think you actually have to ask that question to the UAE, and I don't think you have to ask that question to Bahrain, and I don't think you have to ask that question to Egypt.
Well, that's important.
But you do have to ask that. I also don't think you have to ask that question to the PA, because the Abbas hates Hamas I don't want to say as much as Israel, but he hates Hamas. We are fighting, I would say it's an enemy that's in the dark ages. It's an enemy that embeds weapons in hospitals, in schools, put command centers in buildings. Yesterday there was I believe it was yesterday, Israel knocked down a building that housed the press corps, Al Jazeera, and one of the other press agencies. And lo and behold, it was also where the Hamas intelligence units lived. Well, you know why media is skewed coming out of Gaza. If they're sitting in the same building as Hamas intelligence units, they have to figure what's going on there. So I think these are the questions that have to ask, not to the Jewish community and not to Israel. It's the questions have to be asked to the lawmakers who are supporting Hamas, who want to not only restrict Israel's action, but want to promote Hamas as innocent people who are government. I mean, in 2006, Israel pulled out of Gaza. Hamas is the ruler of Gaza. They are in charge. The reason that there's a blockade around Gaza, both, by the way, from Egypt and from Israel, is because they're a dangerous organization that is trying at its hardest to both inflict damage to Israel, but also inflict damage to Egypt. So I think that those are the people that need to ask the question.
Okay.
You have to ask the question: why does the New York Times write articles talking about the innocent Gazans, obsessing about it? I took a look at the New York Times this morning. I went on to the op-ed and the opinion page. Since Monday morning, there were 8 articles written on the op-ed. So these are only opinion pieces. I'm not talking about the news or the supposed news that they write in the main paper, but I'm talking about that last page of the front section. So on Monday, there was a piece by Thomas Friedman about Israel and the Palestinians being riled up about what's going on in Jerusalem, another intifada. On Tuesday, on Monday also, there was another article by a woman at the Palestinian Outreach Director who wrote, "Why so much rests on the face of a tiny neighborhood in East Jerusalem?" On Tuesday, Palestinian refugees deserve to return home by Peter Beinart. On Wednesday, my child asked, "Can Israel destroy our building if the power is out?" by a co-editor of the Gaza Unsilenced, a person who promotes Gaza. On Wednesday, also an article by Brett Stevens, the one article that was pro-Israel, or "For the sake of peace, Israel must rout Hamas." On Thursday the 14th, Friday the 14th, the U.S. must stop being an apologist for Netanyahu government by Bernie Sanders. You got to ask the question in the New York Times: what are you promoting? Why are you promoting a genocidal regime that harms its people as much as it harms Israel? There's a reason that they don't have the vaccine in Gaza. It's because they put millions and millions of dollars into creating rockets to terrorize Israel. So I don't think the question of what do we do about Gaza, I think our military knows what to do about Gaza. Yes, there are problems, and maybe they should have knocked out the tunnels earlier. But we try to keep calm. We try to keep deterrence. Sometimes, it gets out of hand. Obviously, this time, I think Hamas thought, let's fire a couple of rockets in Jerusalem and everything will be okay. I don't think they got what they bargained for. And when we see the pictures that come out of Gaza in the next couple of weeks, and we see entire neighborhoods leveled, all their infrastructure of tunnels and their bomb-making facilities leveled, I think maybe they'll get the message this time, hopefully. If not, we'll have to do it again, and we'll have to endure the same criticism from the EU, from the UN, and from certain elements in America. But I think that's what we have to do, and we're not backing down. I want to say, as far as the internal Israel strife, the things that have been going into the mixed neighborhoods in Lod, in Ramla, in Akko, in some of the other places, it seems in the last couple of days that things have calmed down. It seems that the police were unprepared. The border guards were unprepared. I think now they're getting into place. There were a lot of arrests over the weekend in Lod where they torched 3 shuls. And who would believe in 2021 in the sovereign state of Israel that anti-Semites would go and burn shuls, and people had to run to get the Sifrei Torah out of the shul, and people had to come escort women and children out of their apartments in the sovereign state of Israel in 2021. It's unbelievable to even think of it, but I think things are getting in control. Today, the Ram party, which is one of the Arab Israeli parties in the Knesset, which many people have probably heard about because they might be the first party to enter into an Israeli coalition agreement, a government agreement, announced that they will help rebuild the synagogues in Lod, which was a major positive step for coexistence in Israel. I believe in Israel, the majority, and this is my opinion only, just because of my experience working with people, being in hospitals, being in clinics, and seeing coexistence between Jews and Arabs, is I believe that the majority of people want the same thing. I believe Jews and Arabs want to see their children succeed. They want to see food on their table. They want to see economic prosperity. They want to see their kids live a better life than them. Israeli Arabs have a higher standard of living than any Arabs in any Arab country in the world, including they're not giving up their Israeli citizenship to join the PA, and they're certainly not volunteering to go to Gaza to live under Hamas. I believe that those forces of good will prevail, and I think that maybe this is a catalyst to see more coexistence. The other thing that I think the people of Lud, the Arabs, will be surprised to see is right now there are about 15,000 Jews living in Lud. I think in the next year you might see 50,000 Jews move to Lud, and we're not a towering people anymore. This isn't Poland. This isn't the Ukraine. We have lots of people who served in the army, and we're a proud people, and we're not victims any longer. So they're not going to be able to scare us. So people are going to come back, and people are going to come back in droves. And if anything, the people in Lud who caused the disturbances, they're going to be the people in trouble. It's not going to be the people. It's not going to be the Jews, and it's not going to be the people who want coexistence.
And what do we do with the extremists who, in Bat Yam lynch a Palestinian, and some of the, the crazy Jews? We all have crazy people within our families. What happens, and how can Israel address that kind of unrest from the Jewish side?
Well, I think one thing that happens in Israel whenever there is an extremist act, whether it's from Ben Gvir and the Kahanists or the Hilltop Youth, where you see things that occur, we have a rule of law in Israel, and the courts, for whatever criticism people have of the courts and the legal system, is we definitely don't skimp when it comes to Jews on the rule of law. Jews get prosecuted. We know from the West Bank when there have been murders by Hilltop Youth, they go to jail. They're not, and we condemn right away. The entire society condemned what happened in Bat Yam. I mean, people couldn't go quick enough to condemn. President Rivlin was on the air an hour after it occurred. The Prime Minister was on the air an hour after it occurred. With the message,
we don't hear that.
Yeah, well, it's it's part of the narrative that they don't want you to hear. Even Smotrich, who is from the same party as Ben Gvir, came out and said, "We don't do this. That's not our way." As far as Ben Gvir himself, I think the best thing to do is just ignore him. He wants to go into Sheikh Jarrah. He wants to go into Lud. Don't send cameras to follow him. Don't send the newspaper to report about him. After a while, he'll get the message that he's not that important. All we've done is elevate him to importance. Now, clearly, there have been some mistakes getting him into the government the way that things happened in the last election. I don't know if I would have promoted that, but we have extremists on both sides. There are a lot of people in the Knesset that won't stand for the national anthem, that call Jews killers, that support the International Court of Justice against Israeli soldiers. So I'm not sure it's possible for one side to not have extremists if the other side has extremists. Either we're going to bar everybody from the Knesset that has an extremist view on either side, or we're going to allow free speech and people to do things. Now, the only person ever barred from the Knesset was Meir Kahane. Okay, okay, we have a record, and I think I'm pretty proud of the people of Israel. I think we know how to stand up. I think when a mosque gets burned in a price tag attack, Israel stands up, and the Jewish people go and rebuild that mosque. And I'm hoping what we're seeing now with Abbas from the Ra'am party, who's saying that they're going to come and rebuild the shuls in Lud. I hope we're seeing reciprocity now, and that we'll see more coexistence, and those extremists will go further and further to the end of society, and we'll be in a better situation.
Mark, I have one last question, then we're going to open up. There are a few questions in the chat, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave it, and we're going to turn this over to our Cantor Schron. I have to unfortunately be at the cemetery for some unveilings. But I did want to, I know you're not the Mashiach, and you've talked a lot about, the New York Times, but it's not just the Times. It's ABC, it's CBS, it's CNN, it's MSNBC, whatever. Even Fox, whatever station you turn on, there is all kinds of misinformation, and we don't get a true and a good picture. Today we've gotten a little more truth from you. Thank you. But what do you think that all of the people who are on this call, and hopefully we're taping this, and we're hoping that this discussion will be shared in the community. What can we do to get the word out? What can we do to help people to understand what Hamas is, to understand that Israel has the most moral army in the world, to understand that that immediately the lynching in Bat Yam was condemned, and by none less than the president and the prime minister of the country. I mean, these kinds of things. We today in this group, we're talking to the choir, but I've been talking about I've been encouraging members of the community to speak to people they don't usually talk to speak to their neighbors, to speak to the non-Jewish community, to really engage in conversation calmly, to say, well, gee, what do you think? Because the stuff that a lot of people say, well, cancel your subscription and just ignore it. Well, that's okay, but that doesn't really solve the problem, because there's plenty of people who are not ignoring it, or plenty of people who that's all they get. So I think this is another war that we're fighting, and I'd like to see if you think that there's anything that either Israel or the American Jewish community can do that you would like to be online as suggesting.
Well, I think the first thing is, Jews are a pretty obsessive people, and we're pretty obsessed with Israel, and the paper is pretty obsessed with Israel. I've just, New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, CBS, CNN, NBC, CNBC, MSNBC. You would think Israel is the size of like Canada, and we have 150 billion people living here, and everything that happens is the most unbelievable thing in the world. I mean, there are a lot of unbelievable things here that happen, but if you look at, what other country has 8 op-ed pieces in 1 week in the New York Times? Nobody talks about that. A lot of things are going on in the world. So the obsession with Israel is just unbelievable. I think that non-Jews, believe it or not, are not obsessed with Israel. Certainly not in the outside of the evangelical world, where they are obsessed with Israel towards a positive way towards Israel. There's certainly the non-Jewish world. I don't think Israel, is on the radar for a lot of people, because when I speak to people in business, in fact, I spoke to someone the other day on Thursday in California. I said, well, I'm coming from Jerusalem where we're in a war. She said, there's a war in Israel? So I think that that's part of our obsession the Jewish obsession with Israel. I think there's a part of it, the obsession from the more progressive world in Israel because of the intersectionality, where Israel is seen as an occupier and apartheid, and it fits very well into the narrative. I don't know what Israel has to do with Black Lives Matters, but it seems that Israel and Black Lives Matters are interconnected, and I still can't figure out what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, how that was affected by Israel, and why someone in Ferguson, Missouri should be carrying a place card that says Palestinian Lives Matter. I don't know why it is. I think on a practical level, I think people have to write in to challenge the media outlets. I think you have to support organizations like Camera, which are out there trying to disseminate the truth and call people to the carpet. It's very hard even when there are retractions, because as everybody knows, most people don't read the the changes in articles. You know, once it's out there, especially in the internet world, people aren't going back and looking for retractions and say, oh, by the way, that fact pattern was not correct. So I think it's a difficult time. We live in a very difficult world. The media is a very difficult animal than it used to be. In fact, I just got my Brandeis University alumni magazine, and I was reading a story about that quoted a professor of journalism, who she said that she teaches her students to look at a set of facts, have a point of view, and advocate for that point of view. I thought that was advocating. That wasn't journalism, but I guess that's the way journalism is today. In a lot of ways, unfortunately, is advocating, especially when the mainstream journalists are competing against anybody who can post up on Facebook. They have to sensationalize their story and go for eyeballs, because that's what the world is today. Whoever has the most eyeballs wins, and that's the world we're in today. I think definitely speaking to people and telling the truth. I think getting the message out that the reason that there are people killed in Gaza is because Hamas fires rockets. If there are no rockets, there are no dead people. I think that's a very simple message, and that is the message. No rockets, no dead people. How would you react if Washington was under fire? How would you react if New York was under fire? How would you react if London was under fire? We're over today, I just checked, we're over 3,200 missiles since Monday. 3,200 missiles. Could you imagine if Little Neck, New York was getting pounded by 3,200 missiles from Great Neck? I think even Little Neck would fight back, you know, or if New York was getting pounded by New Jersey, I think even Cuomo would react. Maybe not de Blasio, but Cuomo would probably react. That's what we're out there. You got to support organizations like Camera. You got to support organizations like AIPAC. You got to make sure that people who tell you that J Street is pro-Israel are told, no, it's not pro-Israel. They might think they're pro-Israel, but they're not pro-Israel. When they're advocating for Hamas, they're not pro-Israel. When they're advocating for support of Iran, they're not pro-Israel. So I think it's very important that people know that. And I think, like I said before, I think it's much easier to get this message across to the non-Jewish world and the non-progressive world. It's much harder to get it through to the Jewish world. For whatever reason, it might be Jewish guilt. I don't know. It's very difficult. For 2,000 years, we lived in the Galut. We lived as a people who were subjects of other people, and we cowered in front of enemies. And today we're a strong nation that is the stronger one. And, you know, there's a great thing, you know, Israel, you can't screw around with them anymore. Not the same old Israel. And I think that makes certain people feel a little bad. You know, how could we Jews be killing other people? Well, again, the message is, don't shoot rockets at us. We won't shoot you, because in the end of the day, any person, any Jew living in Israel, the government feels a right and an obligation to protect. 3,200 missiles.
Thank you, Mark. I'm gonna conclude my part by quoting our speaker on Sunday, who said, the Yom Kippur War changed Israel in that we learned that we must be strong, because if we're not strong, we're going to be decimated. And that's who we are. We're no longer in Poland or in Germany or anywhere else, but we are in charge of our own destiny, and we've got to be strong and defend ourselves. That's why the Israeli army is called the Israel Defense Forces. I would like to invite Cantor Schron, who heads up a twice weekly Lunch and Learn on Israel and Zionism. I would like to ask Josh if you'll start with Marty Marks had a question about the Sheikh Jarrah and something that Mark said. And if you could take some of the questions and bring them forth. And I want to wish everyone a Chag Sameach, and let us all feel the warmth and the strength and have the understanding that we as Jews are one people. And to quote my colleague Dan Wolpe, if we remember the 6 million Jews from the Holocaust, we cannot forget the 7 million Jews who are in Israel. Very, very important that we are one people, and we need to be together. I'm going to say goodbye and thank you, Mark. We'll be in touch, and it's all yours, Josh.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, Rabbi Yaffe. And thank you, Mark, for some really, really insightful words. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. Marty Marks asked a question. You just spoke about the media, and there is a lot of disinformation and misinformation out there. What media sources do you recommend? Where should we here in America be getting our news so that we have a good, clear picture of what's really going on?
I wish I had an answer for that. I don't even, I think there's sometimes the Jerusalem Post gives you good information. Sometimes the Jerusalem Post gives you bad information. Same thing with the Times of Israel in the English language. Same things with Arutz Sheva. It's hard. I think commentary and listening to JNS, where Jonathan Tobin puts out a lot of good things. I think the Wall Street Journal, certainly you get a much more balanced point of view, even though when I say balance, I would say probably a more realistic view of what's going on in Israel. I think the problem with media today is that, it's narrative, and then let's use some selective facts to try to justify the narrative that we want to portray. That's the hardest thing, to be able to look at that. I mean, there was an article in the Times on Monday when they started talking about the rioting, and there's something that happened. There was a car that was driving outside the old city on Monday. A Jewish person was driving a car and it was pelted with rocks. The driver, as he was trying to escape, wound up ramming a Palestinian who was throwing rocks at him, or an Arab that was throwing rocks at him. And the story in the Times, if you look at the Times on Monday, they had a picture, and the quote in the picture, I'll just get it out because I have it. I was just so outraged. It said, a Palestinian man scuffled with a Jewish man who appeared to swerve his car into a passerby after it is hit with a stone. It's like I don't know. I don't even know what to say. It's like, just ridiculous. They get a lot of, just the chronological order of things comes out very skewed. So to promote a narrative, if you want to say, you justify rockets, you say Israel invades mosque compound and riot ensues. You mix the facts up. It's not factual, but it just is wrong, the wrong order. So it's very difficult today with news. I think we all find that way, and it's not just on Israel. It's on a whole host of issues. And I think it's getting worse, unfortunately, with the way the media is skewed and tries to take sides. It's all opinion today, pretty much. There's very little fact. That's we don't have Walter Cronkite anymore.
Very true. Jerry Schwartz asked the question, I read in the Jerusalem Post that Hamas is losing battles, but winning the war considering all of the factions and strife within Israel among its citizens? What do you think? Is there enough infighting among Israelis that Hamas is winning in some way?
Well, the one thing about Israelis and war is there are no political parties during war. For the most part, everybody is Israeli. We saw a great video today that came out about Friday in Lud, a video of hundreds of men going to Lud to stay for Shabbat, basically moving in for Shabbat and Yom Tov so that they can be there to protect, leaving their families and moving in. And all having the same message. We're one nation, we're one people, we're here to protect our brothers. I think that sentiment is very strong in Israel today, even with all the political infighting, and sometimes our politicians are the worst at it. Our politicians are all, for the most part, I think very much ego-driven, but the people are very united. Today, there's no difference between someone in North Tel Aviv and someone in Hebron. I think we're all on the same wavelength. I think there's just about unanimous support for what the army is doing right now. I don't think there's, like I said before, the 15,000 Jews that live in Lud, that the Arab population or the extremist Arab population in Lud is afraid of. I think they're going to get a shock when 100,000 people move there. Young, idealistic people. Where the people of this country are very idealistic. They love Israel. They love the people of Israel. And just the videos that have been coming out of the soldiers going down to the border, making videos saying, "We are fighting. We are proud. We are saving our homeland." Fighting for your homeland is something that's very different from fighting a war 3,000 miles away. It's very different. Our neighbor is in there. She knows what's going on. It's a very different experience. I got a video from my soon-to-be nephew, who is marrying one of our nieces. We got a video on the family WhatsApp of he's in the Navy, and someone took a video. Their whole platoon, as they made Havdalah together, singing and dancing. This is what the nation of Israel is. We come together in times of crisis. Fortunately, today, we have the ability to defend ourselves. We're not going like sheep to the slaughter. In fact, we're never going to the slaughter again. We are always going to be defending ourselves, defending our nation and defending our people. Now, the Israeli army goes to lots of places and is going to be the first one in to defend everybody. The law of return was enacted so that anybody at any time that Jews are in trouble, that they can come to Israel. We'll never experience again a situation like the SS St. Louis, where Jews are just at sea and have nowhere to go. We have a country, we have a strong country, we have patriotic country. I think that's the message. They're not going to scare us. Hamas does not scare us. They could shoot 10,000 rockets in the next 2 weeks. We're still going to pound them, and we're not going to give in to empty statements by the UN or empty statements by the EU. We have friends in the world. We know we have friends. Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke about the fact that he got 25 calls from leaders around the world saying, "Stay strong." The Austrian Parliament put the Israeli flag on top of the Austrian Parliament. I believe the Czech Republic did the same. We have friends in the world. We are all fighting the same enemy in the end of the day. Radical Islam is the enemy of the world. Without radical Islam in the world today, there would be no terror. Just think about where terror comes from in the world today. It's radical Islam. Hamas is radical Islam. No bombs, no death. It's as simple as that. We have to hope that the next generation of Arab Israelis grow up wanting to go to the University of Haifa and the Technion and be engineers at Microsoft and at Amazon rather than being suicide bombers. That is what we're fighting about right now. That is what we're fighting about in Israeli society. That's the coexistence that we want. We want more engineers that are going to Microsoft and fewer engineers that are going to build bombs.
Wow, very well said, and some great optimism in your words. I have a question from Eva, who says, who is behind the Israeli Arab insurrection, and how did Israel not see this coming?
From what I understand, in Lod, in particular, it was imams who were preaching at the mosques during Ramadan that were coming from Hamas backed. And I just found out Israel has 22,000 police officers. We used to have 25,000. Now we have 22,000. We just don't have enough resources right now to do everything. So yes, I do. I think it was an intelligence failure, an internal intelligence failure. Sounds like it. I don't. I think they got a handle on it. But just like in some of the riots in like Portland, Oregon, where the Antifa people started to riot and the National Guard and the police in Portland couldn't get it under control. Sometimes these things are the quote unquote spontaneous, the planned spontaneous events are just not caught up by the law enforcement people. So I think it's definitely backed by Hamas. There are certain elements that are radicalized within Israel and within the territories, hopefully it's now getting under control, and hopefully we're gonna the right side of the equation and coexistence is going to win out.
All right. I think we'll take one more question, and that is from Marty, who says 40 years seems to be a long time to resolve a land dispute. Are the 4 cases before the Supreme Court relatively new cases stemming from an old problem, or old cases that differ from most, thus taking decades to work their way through the legal system?
As far as I understand, and I can send a nice piece that was written about this that really lays out the whole legal basis. I don't know if Marty's a lawyer or not, but it goes into a lot about the actual property law. Israel is a unique place with property law. We have the property law in Israel goes back to the Ottoman Empire, it goes back to the British Mandate, Israeli, Jordanian, and there are various different things that go into Israeli property law. I believe in the case, these aren't the only cases in the only houses in Sheikh Jarrah. These houses in particular, the 4 in question, when the Jordanians took them over, they didn't register those houses as Jordanian. For some reason, either they didn't want to or they just failed to do so. The other Arabs that are living in that area that have been living there since 1948, they haven't had issues with. It's these particular houses that were ruled to be that the people have been ruled as squatters or tenants that aren't paying rent. So I could definitely, it's a very complicated issue, but it's been through the courts, multi-level of the courts. And I can also say when the Israeli courts usually adjudicate issues between Jews and Arabs as far as land, the burden of proof is very heavily put on the Jews to prove that they have ownership rights. There are numerous cases where Jews have claimed ownership rights of certain areas when Arabs have come with deeds, some legitimate deeds, some fuzzy deeds. In this situation, I believe they have a complete unbroken chain of ownership from the mid 1800s through today. So I'd be happy to send the article and the information on this, but it's definitely not evictions. It's definitely not Judaization. It's definitely not what's being characterized by people like AOC and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. They are just being lazy and they're not looking at the facts and they're misleading the American people.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for your words. Every time you come and speak to our congregation, you enlighten us and you just have a way of simplifying everything and breaking it down and giving us the information that we really need to be informed people who care about Israel. And that's why we're all here to really make sure that we are as well good representatives for Israel throughout the world. Robert Lunzer is on the call. Just one second. And he wanted to remind everyone that all that you're saying means that we all should be investing in Israel bonds. Israel needs our help. That's right. Israel needs us more than ever. Sorry? Israel needs us more than ever, and now would be a wonderful time to help Israel by investing in State of Israel bonds. And thank you, Robert, for that great reminder.
If I could, Candy, before we end, first of all, I want to wish everybody a Chag Sameach and a good Yontif. And I just wanted to remind you of 2 points when you're being bombarded with people. people are dying because they're shooting rockets. They're shooting rockets from areas where children are living, elderly are living, the media is living. They're cowards. They don't fire at the army, they fire at civilian populations. So that's one message that you can give back to people. Second thing, I just want to leave you all with a tefillah that we say every Shabbat in the shul, and I think it's very appropriate for us now since we're still under attack. Actually, rockets have been falling throughout the hour and a half that we've been talking. We say in shul every Shabbat, Mishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov, hu yivarech et chayalei tzva hagana liYisrael, v'anshei kochot habitachon, ha'omdim al mishmar etzenu v'arei elheinu migvul ha'onan ad mibar Mitzrayim, u'min hayan hagadol ad lavo ha'arava, u'b'kol makom shehem b'yabasha ba'avir v'yam. Yitein Adonai et orvenu hakamim aleinu nigafim lifneihem. Hakadosh Baruch Hu yishmor v'yatzil et chayaleinu mikol tzara v'tzukah, mikol nega u'machala, v'yishlach bracha v'hatzlacha b'chol maseh yedehem. Yadber sonenu tachtehem, v'atrim b'cheter Yeshua v'ateret nitzachon, v'kuyam behem hakatuv, ki Adonai Elohechem ha'olech imachem le'ilchem lachem im oivechem, l'oshiachem v'nomar amen. We should all hear good things. There should be peace in the Holy Land, and everybody should come visit. And I promise it'll be safe. We're corona-free, and hopefully in a couple of weeks we'll be rocket-free. So, Chag Sameach. Have a good week, everybody, and thank you very much.
Mark, thank you.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe,
Thank you,
and
Mark.
wish you a Chag Sameach, a great Yontiv, and we hope to see you again under much happier circumstances.